The silence in the house was the hardest part. Not the empty bed, though that was difficult. Not the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, though those kept her awake at night. Not even the sympathetic looks from neighbors who had stopped bringing casseroles 2 months ago. It was the silence, the absence of his footsteps on the stairs, his humming while he made coffee, his voice calling her name from another room. The silence was a presence now, heavy and suffocating, filling every corner of the house they'd bought together 3 years ago. Emma Hartwell sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, and stared at the stack of unopened mail. The morning light came through the window in pale strips, illuminating the dust motes that drifted through the air like tiny ghosts. Outside, the first snow of November was beginning to fall, soft and soundless, covering the world in white. She was 5 months pregnant. The baby moved inside her, a gentle flutter that felt like butterfly wings against her ribs. She placed her hand over the swell of her belly, felt the warmth there, the life growing despite everything that had been taken away. Thomas would never meet this child, would never feel these kicks or see these first snows or hold this baby in his arms. The grief rose up sudden and sharp, stealing her breath. The cancer had taken him in 8 months, from diagnosis to funeral, from hope to hospice, from the man who danced with her in the kitchen to the shell of him who could barely whisper her name. He'd died on a Tuesday morning in September, holding her hand, and she'd felt something inside her break that she wasn't sure would ever heal. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty kitchen, though she didn't know who she was apologizing to. Thomas, the baby, herself. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Emma flinched, her hand tightening around the mug. She let it ring once, twice, 3 times before she finally reached for it, already knowing it would be someone she didn't want to talk to. Everyone wanted something from her now. The mortgage company, the insurance people, the hospital billing department. They all spoke in the same careful, professional voices, asking for money she didn't have, patience she'd run out of, decisions she wasn't ready to make. "Hello? Emma, it's Margaret Chen. I'm calling from Chen and Associates." Emma closed her eyes, trying to place the name. The voice was older, gentle, but professional, with an accent she couldn't quite identify. "I'm sorry. I was Adelaide Hartwell's estate attorney, Thomas's grandmother. I have some news that couldn't wait, dear. May I speak with you for a few minutes?" Emma's throat tightened. Adelaide, Thomas's grandmother, who'd passed away 6 years ago, long before Emma had even met Thomas. She'd heard stories. The formidable woman who'd raised Thomas's father after his mother died, who'd lived alone in an old Victorian house upstate, who'd been buried beside her husband in a cemetery Emma had never visited. "What about the estate?" Emma asked quietly. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. The house was left in a trust with very specific instructions. Adelaide stipulated that it would pass to Thomas upon certain conditions being met, and now that Thomas has... Margaret's voice softened. "Now that he's gone, and with you carrying his child, those conditions have been fulfilled. The house belongs to you, Emma. Free and clear, no mortgage. The taxes are paid through next year." Emma sat very still, her hand frozen on the mug. "I don't understand." Adelaide wanted the house to stay in the family. She wanted it to go to someone who would need it, who would fill it with life again. The trust has been paying for its maintenance all these years. It's been waiting, in a sense, waiting for you." The words felt impossible, like something from a dream. Emma looked around her small kitchen, the peeling linoleum, the appliances that came with the rental, the water stain on the ceiling she'd been meaning to have fixed. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and she had no idea how she'd pay it. Her savings were gone, swallowed by hospital bills and funeral costs. Her job at the library had been understanding, but she'd already missed too many days. "Where is it?" she heard herself ask. "Millbrook, about 2 hours north. It's a beautiful property, Emma. 10 acres, mostly woods. The house itself needs some work. It's been empty for a while, but the structure is sound. Adelaide took good care of it. 10 acres, a house with no mortgage, space for the baby to grow." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Can I see it? I can meet you there tomorrow if you'd like. I'll bring the keys and the paperwork. There's something else, too." Adelaide left specific instructions that certain things in the house were not to be touched or removed until the rightful heir arrived. She was very particular about that. "What things?" Margaret paused. "She didn't say. She only said that you would know when the time came." I've always found that curious, but Adelaide was a woman who believed in providence. Perhaps she was right. After Emma hung up, she sat in the kitchen for a long time, watching the snow fall. The baby moved again, stronger this time, as if responding to the shift in her mother's heartbeat. Emma pressed both hands to her belly and closed her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe this is what we need." The house on Ridgemont Lane felt even emptier that night. Emma moved through the rooms like a ghost, packing what little she owned into cardboard boxes. Most of the furniture had come with the rental. Most of their wedding gifts had been sold to pay bills. What remained fit easily into her car: clothes, books, a few photographs, Thomas's favorite sweater that still smelled faintly of him. She worked until midnight, her back aching, her hands dusty and tired. When she finally climbed into bed, she lay on Thomas's side, pressing her face into his pillow. The scent of him was almost gone now, faded to just a memory of a memory. "I'm scared," she told the darkness. "I don't know how to do this without you." The wind rattled the windows, the house creaked and settled around her. And somewhere deep inside, the baby turned in sleep, dreaming dreams she would never remember, but would carry with her always. Emma left at dawn. The drive north took her through small towns that looked like postcards: white church steeples, red barns, farms tucked into valleys between rolling hills. The snow had stopped, leaving the world clean and bright, the trees bare black lines against a pale sky. She drove with the radio off, listening to the hum of the tires, the rhythm of her own breathing. The GPS led her off the highway onto progressively smaller roads until she was driving on gravel, the forest pressing close on either side. She passed a hand-painted sign that read, "Millbrook, population 847, and then another mile of woods before the trees finally opened up. And there it was. The house stood at the top of a slight rise, surrounded by snow-covered lawn that stretched back into woods. It was Victorian, 3 stories tall, painted a soft gray with white trim. A wraparound porch circled the first floor. Gabled windows looked out from the attic like watchful eyes. A stone chimney rose from the center, dark against the winter sky. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Emma pulled into the gravel drive and turned off the engine. Her hands were shaking. Through the windshield, she could see Margaret Chen standing on the porch, a small Asian woman in her 70s, wearing a long wool coat and holding a folder of papers. Emma took a deep breath, placed her hand on her belly, and whispered, "Here we go." She opened the car door and stepped out into the cold, clean air of her new life. The porch steps creaked beneath Emma's boots as she climbed toward Margaret Chen, who waited with a gentle smile that somehow made the enormity of the moment feel manageable. Up close, the house was even more imposing, the windows tall and dark, the door a deep burgundy with an oval window of beveled glass that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the worn floorboards. "Emma," Margaret said warmly, extending her hand, "I'm so glad you came." Emma shook her hand, surprised by the strength in the older woman's grip. "Thank you for calling. I still can't quite believe this is real." "I understand. Grief has a way of making everything feel unreal for a while." Margaret's eyes were kind, knowing. "But this house is very real, and it's yours now. Shall we go inside?" The key Margaret handed her was old brass, heavy and cold in Emma's palm. She fitted it into the lock, felt the mechanism turn with a solid click, and pushed open the door. The smell hit her first, not musty or abandoned, as she'd feared, but something softer. Lemon oil and old wood and something floral. She couldn't quite name. The entrance hall stretched before her, the walls papered in a pattern of climbing roses that had faded to gentle pastels. A staircase rose on the right, the banister carved dark wood that gleamed even in the dim light. To the left, she could see a parlor, furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. "The trust has paid for a caretaker to come once a month," Margaret explained, following her inside. "Just basic maintenance, keeping the pipes from freezing, that sort of thing. But no one has lived here since Adelaide passed." Emma walked slowly down the hall, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Doorways opened into rooms filled with covered furniture and pale winter light. She could see the bones of the house beneath the dust and stillness. High ceilings with ornate plaster medallions, crown molding, built-in bookshelves, a fireplace in nearly every room. It was grand, without being ostentatious, elegant in a way that spoke of another era. The kitchen was at the back of the house, surprisingly large, with white cabinets and black and white checkered floors. Someone had left dishes in the drainer by the sink, 2 plates, 2 cups, a handful of silverware, as if Adelaide had simply stepped out and would return at any moment. "She died here," Margaret said quietly, "upstairs in her bed, peacefully, in her sleep. She was 93. The caretaker found her the next morning." Emma ran her hand along the counter, feeling the cool smoothness of the old laminate. "Thomas never talked much about her. I don't think he saw her very often. Adelaide was complicated. She loved fiercely, but she also carried a great deal of pain. She lost her husband young, raised her son alone, and then lost him too, Thomas's father, when he was only 40. Heart attack. After that, she became more reclusive. But she never stopped caring about family. She asked about Thomas every time I visited, wanted to know everything, where he was, what he was doing, if he was happy." "Did she know about me?" Emma asked, turning to face Margaret. The older woman nodded slowly. "Yes, Thomas's father's sister, Aunt Diane, kept Adelaide informed. She knew Thomas had married. She knew about the baby." Margaret paused, her expression softening. And she knew about the cancer. I visited her 2 weeks before she died, and she made me promise that when the time came, I would make sure you got this house. She said, that baby will need roots. That girl will need shelter. Make sure they have both. Emma felt her throat tighten, tears burning hot behind her eyes. A woman she'd never met, who'd watched her grandson's life from a distance, had thought of her in those final days, had made provision for her, had given her this impossible gift. I don't know what to say, Emma whispered. You don't have to say anything. Just accept it. Accept that sometimes grace comes when we need it most, in forms we never expected. Margaret squeezed her arm, gently. Now there's something I need to show you. Something Adelaide was very specific about. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, Margaret moving carefully, one hand on the banister. The landing opened onto a hallway lined with doors. Bedrooms, Emma assumed, and a bathroom with ancient pink tile, visible through one open doorway. At the end of the hall, beneath a window that looked out over the snow-covered backyard, was another door. This one was different, narrower, painted white, with a crystal doorknob that caught the light. The attic, Margaret said, producing another key from her pocket. Adelaide's instructions were very clear. Nothing up there was to be touched or moved until you arrived. I confess, I've never been up there myself. She kept it locked, even when she was alive. She said it held memories too precious to disturb. The key turned smoothly, and the door swung open to reveal a steep staircase climbing into darkness. Margaret flipped a switch, and a single bulb illuminated the stairs, casting long shadows. I'll wait here, Margaret said. I think this is something you need to see alone. Emma's heart was beating faster now, a mixture of anticipation and unease fluttering in her chest. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rough wooden wall for balance, the other resting on her belly. The baby was quiet now, as if listening, waiting. The attic was larger than she'd expected, stretching the full length of the house. The ceiling sloped down on both sides, following the roofline, but the center was tall enough to stand comfortably. Light came through two small windows at either end, gray and soft, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air. The space was surprisingly organized. Boxes stacked neatly along one wall, an old dress form in the corner, a trunk with brass fittings, a rocking chair facing one of the windows. But what drew Emma's attention, what made her breath catch in her throat, was the door. It stood against the far wall between the window and the eaves. A proper door with a frame and hinges, as if someone had built a room within the attic itself. It was painted pale blue, and hanging from the doorknob was a simple wooden sign, the kind a child might make, with careful letters burned into the wood, Adelaide's room. But that wasn't what made Emma's hands begin to tremble. Hanging from a nail beside the door was a key on a faded ribbon, and attached to the ribbon was a small envelope, yellowed with age, with a single word written on it in spidery handwriting, Emma, her name, written by a woman who died before Emma and Thomas had even met. She crossed the attic floor slowly, her footsteps creaking on the old boards. The envelope was sealed with wax that crumbled slightly as she lifted it from the ribbon. Inside was a single piece of notepaper, the same spidery handwriting covering both sides. Dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then my grandson has found you, loved you, and perhaps lost you too soon. I am sorry for that. Loss has been the great teacher of my life, and I would have spared you both if I could. Behind this door is a room I have kept locked for 60 years. It holds the story of who I was before grief made me small, before fear made me silent. I was loved once, deeply and truly, and I loved in return. What I learned from that love has sustained me through every dark year since. Inside this room, you will find letters, photographs, and something else. Something I made with my own hands, something meant to be passed down. I could not give it to my son. He would not have understood. But you will understand, I think. You will need it. Do not be afraid of what you find. Let it comfort you. Let it remind you that love persists, even when the beloved is gone. Especially then. You are not alone, dear girl. You have never been alone. With all my heart, Adelaide Rose Hartwell. Emma read the letter twice, 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. Her hands were shaking as she folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. The baby moved inside her, a firm kick against her ribs, as if urging her forward. She took the key from the ribbon, fitted it into the lock, and turned it. The door opened with a soft sigh, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. The room was smaller than Emma expected, perhaps 10 feet square, tucked beneath the slope of the roof. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in intention. Every inch had been arranged with care, preserved with love, as if Adelaide had been curating a museum of her own heart. The walls were covered in photographs, dozens of them, arranged in careful rows. Black and white images, some faded to sepia, showing a young woman Emma didn't recognize. Dark hair pinned in victory rolls, bright eyes, a smile that seemed to hold secrets. In many of the photos, the woman stood beside a man in uniform, their bodies angled toward each other, in that unmistakable language of intimacy. His hand on her waist, her head on his shoulder. Both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's eye. Emma stepped closer, studying the faces. The young woman was Adelaide. She could see it now in the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. But this Adelaide was different from the elderly woman in the single photograph Thomas had kept on his desk. This Adelaide was radiant, alive with a joy that seemed to pour out of the images like light. Along the far wall stood a cedar chest, its surface polished to a soft glow. Beside it sat a small writing desk, the kind with a slanted top that lifted to reveal compartments. And in the corner, catching the weak winter light from a dormer window, was what looked like a cradle, old-fashioned, made of dark wood, with rockers worn smooth from use. Emma's breath caught. She moved to the cedar chest and knelt before it, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. The lid opened easily, and the scent that rose up was overwhelming, lavender and cedar and thyme. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that crinkled beneath her fingers, were baby clothes. Tiny gowns with pearl buttons, hand-knitted booties, embroidered blankets so delicate they seemed made of clouds. Beneath the clothes was a quilt. Emma lifted it carefully, unfolding it across her lap. It was a masterpiece. Dozens of fabric squares sewn together in an intricate pattern, each one embroidered with images. A house, a tree, 2 birds on a branch, a sun rising over hills, a man and a woman holding hands, and in the center, larger than the rest, was a baby cradled in careful stitches, surrounded by words Emma had to squint to read. Love remains. Love persists. Love continues. Her hands trembled as she traced the embroidery, feeling the texture of 60-year-old thread beneath her fingertips. This was made by hand, every stitch a meditation, every image a prayer. Adelaide had created this, and then locked it away, waiting for someone who would understand. "Oh," Emma whispered, and the word came out broken, full of tears she didn't know she'd been holding. "Oh, Adelaide." She didn't know how long she sat there, the quilt in her lap, tears running silently down her face. The baby moved inside her, rolling and stretching, and Emma felt the weight of connection spanning decades. Adelaide, who had loved and lost, reaching forward through time to comfort Emma, who was loving and losing in her own way. A sound from below broke the spell, Margaret's voice calling up the stairs. "Emma, are you all right up there?" Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Yes, I'm coming." But before she descended, she turned to the writing desk. She had to know, had to understand who the man in the photographs was, what story Adelaide had locked away in this room. The desk opened easily, revealing neat compartments filled with letters tied in ribbon. Emma chose one bundle at random and slipped the top letter free. The paper was thin, the ink faded to brown, but the words were still legible. "My darling Adelaide, 3 weeks since I last held you, and already it feels like 3 years. I carry your photograph over my heart, literally, tucked in my breast pocket. The other men tease me about it, but I don't care. Let them laugh. They don't know what it's like to have found what we've found. I can't tell you where we are or where we're going. The censors would black it out anyway. But I can tell you that every night before I sleep, I picture our house. The one we looked at before I shipped out, the Victorian with the wraparound porch. I picture you on that porch waiting for me. I picture our children playing in the yard. I picture growing old with you, Adelaide. That picture is what keeps me alive. I love you, I love you, I love you. Forever yours." James. Emma's chest tightened. James. The man in the photographs was James, and he had written to Adelaide from a war Emma could only guess at, World War II, based on the whole uniforms, the victory rolls, the style of the photographs. He had loved Adelaide. He had promised her forever. And then what? Where was James now? Why had Adelaide lived alone for so many decades? Emma tucked the letter back carefully and selected another bundle, these tied with black ribbon. The first letter made her stomach drop. "Dear Miss Holloway, it is my painful duty to inform you that your fiancé, Lieutenant James Michael Hartwell, was killed in action on June 6, 1944, during the Allied invasion of Normandy. He died bravely in service to his country." Emma couldn't read the rest. She sat back on her heels, the letter shaking in her hands, understanding flooding through her. James Hartwell, Thomas's grandfather. He had died on D-Day, never knowing that Adelaide was pregnant, never knowing he had a son, never coming home to the Victorian house with the wrap-around porch. Adelaide had lived here alone for nearly 60 years, raising their son by herself, keeping James's memory locked in this room like a treasure too precious and too painful to share. "Emma?" Margaret's voice was closer now, at the top of the attic stairs. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's someone here. He says he's the caretaker, and he needs to speak with you about the property." Emma carefully placed the letters back in the desk and closed the lid. She folded the quilt reverently and laid it back in the cedar chest, though every instinct told her to keep it, to carry it downstairs and wrap herself in its comfort. But something stopped her, a sense that she needed to understand more before she claimed what Adelaide had left her. She descended the narrow stairs, pausing to lock the blue door behind her, slipping the key into her pocket. Margaret waited on the landing below, her expression apologetic. "I told him you'd just arrived, but he was quite insistent. Said it couldn't wait. Downstairs, standing in the entrance hall with his boots leaving wet prints on the hardwood, was a man Emma guessed to be in his late 60s. He was tall and lean, weathered in the way of people who worked outdoors, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a canvas work jacket and held a wool cap in his hands, turning it nervously. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "I'm Samuel Porter. I've been the caretaker here for the past 15 years. I'm sorry for your loss. Adelaide spoke highly of your husband." Emma descended the last few steps slowly, one hand on the banister. "Thank you. Margaret told me you've been maintaining the house. I'm grateful for that." Samuel nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "That's actually what I needed to talk to you about. I've tried to keep everything in order, but there's been some complications. Problems I couldn't solve on my own." "What kind of problems?" Margaret asked, moving to stand beside Emma. Samuel shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "The foundation on the east side is cracking. It's been getting worse the past 2 winters, and the roof needs replacing. I've patched it where I could, but it's only a matter of time before we get serious water damage. Then there's the furnace. It's original to the house, and it's on its last legs." Emma felt her heart sink. Of course there were problems. The house had looked too good to be true, because it was too good to be true. Nothing in her life had ever come without a catch. "How much?" she asked quietly. "How much would it cost to fix everything?" Samuel looked pained. "For all of it? Done right? You're looking at $40,000, maybe $50,000. And that's if we don't find more problems once we start opening walls." $50,000. Emma almost laughed. She had $300 in her checking account and another $800 in savings that was supposed to last her until the baby came. She had no job, no income, and medical bills she'd be paying off for years. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. Margaret touched her arm gently. "Emma, the trust has some funds remaining. Not enough to cover everything, but perhaps enough to make the house livable until you can figure out a long-term solution. There's no rush to decide anything today." But Samuel was shaking his head. "That's the other thing I needed to tell you. I got a call yesterday from David Brennan. He owns the property development company that's been buying up land in Millbrook. He wants this property. Made an offer, a very generous offer, through his lawyer. Said he heard the house was finally changing hands and wanted to make his interest known." "How generous?" Margaret asked sharply. $300,000. Cash. As is. He said he'd give Mrs. Hartwell a week to consider before he starts looking at other properties. $300,000. Enough to pay off every debt, to start over somewhere new, to give the baby everything Emma couldn't provide now. Enough to solve every problem she had, except one. Emma looked around the entrance hall, at the faded wallpaper with its climbing roses, at the carved banister James had probably touched 1,000 times, at the house Adelaide had filled with love and loss and locked away memories. She thought of the quilt upstairs, every stitch a prayer. She thought of Adelaide's letter, "You are not alone, dear girl." "Tell Mr. Brennan thank you," Emma heard herself say, "but I'm not selling." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Hartwell, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly, Emma interrupted, surprised by the strength in her own voice. This house belonged to my husband's grandmother. She wanted me to have it. She wanted my baby to have it. I'm not selling it to a developer who'll probably tear it down and build condominiums. Emma, Margaret said gently, perhaps you should take some time to think about this. You don't have to decide right now. But Emma was already shaking her head. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm, a gentle roll as if in agreement. No, I've decided. I'm keeping the house. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You remind me of her, you know. Adelaide. She was stubborn, too. Determined. Once she set her mind to something, there was no changing it. Is that a compliment? Emma asked. Depends on your perspective, Samuel said. But yes, in this case, I'd say it is. He settled his cap back on his head. All right then, Mrs. Hartwell. If you're staying, we've got work to do. I'll come by tomorrow and show you what needs immediate attention. Fair warning, it's not going to be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Emma said, echoing words Thomas used to say. After Samuel left, Margaret helped Emma carry her few boxes in from the car. They worked in comfortable silence, Margaret occasionally pointing out features of the house. The original light fixtures, the built-in window seats, the way the afternoon sun came through the parlor windows and painted everything gold. As the sun began to set, Margaret prepared to leave. She stood in the entrance hall, buttoning her coat, and looked at Emma with something like pride in her eyes. Adelaide would be glad you're here, she said. She would be glad you chose to stay. I hope so, Emma whispered. I hope I'm making the right decision. Margaret squeezed her hand. The right decisions are rarely the easy ones, but they're the ones we can live with. She paused at the door. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. You're not alone in this. And then Emma was alone in the house as darkness fell outside. She wandered from room to room, turning on lights, opening curtains, trying to make the space feel less empty. In the kitchen, she made tea and stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall again, soft and steady. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, and Emma smiled despite her exhaustion. It's just you and me now, she whispered. You and me and Adelaide's house and whatever memories are waiting in that locked room. She climbed the stairs as the house settled around her, wood creaking, the furnace rumbling to life in the basement. In one of the bedrooms, she found a bed already made up with clean sheets, as if someone had known she was coming. She undressed slowly, her body aching, and slipped beneath the covers. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Snow collected on the sills. And somewhere in the darkness, Emma thought she heard the house breathing, in and out, like something alive, like something that had been waiting for her all along. She fell asleep with her hand on her belly, and her thoughts on the blue door in the attic and the story it held. Tomorrow she would read more letters. Tomorrow she would understand what Adelaide wanted her to know. Tomorrow she would begin to uncover the truth. Emma woke to pale morning light, filtering through unfamiliar curtains, and the sound of someone moving around downstairs. For a moment, caught in that space between sleep and waking, she forgot where she was. Her hand reached automatically for Thomas's side of the bed, found only cold sheets, and the grief rushed back with familiar sharpness. Then memory followed. The house, Adelaide's letter, The locked room, the decision to stay. The sounds from below continued. Footsteps, the creak of floorboards, the distant clatter of something in the kitchen. Emma sat up slowly, her heart beating faster. She'd locked all the doors last night, hadn't she? She was certain she had. And Margaret had said the caretaker would come by today, but surely not this early. The gray light suggested it was barely past dawn. She pulled on Thomas's oversized sweater, the one she'd packed, because it still carried the ghost of his scent, and made her way carefully down the stairs. Her hand stayed on the banister, the other resting protectively on her belly. The baby was awake too, pressing against her ribs, as if sensing her mother's unease. The sounds were coming from the kitchen. Emma paused in the doorway and found herself face to face with a woman she'd never seen before. The stranger stood at the sink, washing the dishes that had been sitting in the drainer. She was perhaps 70, small and compact, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands that moved with practiced efficiency. She wore a cardigan over a floral dress, thick stockings, and sensible shoes. When she turned and saw Emma, she didn't startle, just smiled, as if she'd been expecting her. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice carrying the soft accent of someone who'd lived in this region all her life. "I hope I didn't wake you. I tried to be quiet, but these old houses have a language of their own." Emma's mouth opened, but no words came out. The woman dried her hands on a dish towel and crossed the kitchen, extending one hand. "I'm Ruth Porter, Samuel's wife. He told me you'd arrived yesterday, and I thought you might appreciate a hot breakfast and some company. I hope you don't mind. I still have my key from when I used to help Adelaide." Emma shook the offered hand automatically, her mind still catching up. "You knew Adelaide?" "Knew her?" Ruth's smile deepened, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Dear, I loved her. She was my closest friend for 40 years. Now, come, sit. You look exhausted, and you shouldn't be on your feet too long in your condition. I've made coffee, decaf, and there are eggs and toast. When did you last eat a proper meal?" Before Emma could protest, Ruth was guiding her to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair, placing a plate of food in front of her that smelled so good Emma's stomach clenched with sudden hunger. She realized she couldn't remember her last real meal. Yesterday had been scattered, crackers in the car, half a sandwich at a gas station. "Thank you," Emma said quietly, picking up her fork. "This is very kind." Ruth settled into the chair across from her with her own cup of coffee, watching Emma with the frank assessment of someone used to caring for others. "Samuel told me about David Brennan's offer, told me you turned it down." Emma swallowed a bite of eggs. "I did." "Good," Ruth said firmly. "That man has been circling this property like a vulture for 10 years. Adelaide wouldn't sell to him, and I'm glad you won't either." She paused, her expression softening. "I'm also sorry about your husband. Samuel said he passed recently. Cancer?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. "Adelaide's James died young too," Ruth said quietly, though in a different way. "She told me once that the worst part wasn't the dying. It was all the years afterward, all the moments he should have been there for, and wasn't. The birthdays, the graduations, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons. That's where the real grief lives," she said, "in the empty spaces." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "That's exactly it." Ruth reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You'll get through it. Not over it. No one gets over losing their person. But through it. And you won't do it alone. This town takes care of its own, and like it or not, you're one of us now." They sat in comfortable silence while Emma finished eating, the winter morning brightening slowly outside the window. When Emma finally pushed her plate away, Ruth refilled her coffee cup and settled back with the air of someone preparing to share a story. "Adelaide called me 2 weeks before she died," Ruth began. "Asked me to come visit. Said she had things she needed to say. I thought she was just being sentimental. She was 93 after all, and she'd been getting weaker. But when I arrived, she was sitting in her bedroom, surrounded by photograph albums I'd never seen before." Emma leaned forward, listening intently. "She told me about James. Not just the basic facts I'd known for years, but everything. How they met at a church social in 1942. How he proposed after knowing her only 3 months because he was shipping out and couldn't bear to leave without making her his. How they planned a future in this house, this very house they'd picked out together." Ruth's eyes grew distant, remembering. "She told me about the baby, too. Adelaide was pregnant when James died. She didn't know it yet when she got the telegram, but she found out 3 weeks later. She said that baby, James's son, was all that kept her alive that first year." Emma's throat tightened. Thomas's father, the man who died of a heart attack at 40, leaving Adelaide alone again. "She never remarried?" Emma asked. "Never even dated, as far as I know. She said James was her person, her one great love. And when he died, that part of her died too. But she didn't regret it. She told me, and I'll never forget this, she told me, I'd rather have had 6 months of real love than 60 years of settling." Ruth paused, studying Emma's face. "She wanted you to know that. She wanted you to know that what you had with Thomas, however brief, was worth everything." Emma had to look away, blinking hard against tears. Through the window, she could see snow still clinging to the trees, the world frozen and beautiful and sharp enough to cut. "Did she say anything else?" Emma asked. "About the house? About the attic?" Ruth's expression shifted, became more careful. She mentioned there were things in the attic she'd kept locked away. She said when the right person came, when the house had an heir, who would understand, those things should be opened. She made me promise not to go up there myself, not to let Samuel go up there. She said it wasn't our story to discover. Ruth leaned forward. "Did you find something?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "A room. A locked room with Adelaide's name on it, full of photographs and letters, and a quilt, the most beautiful quilt I've ever seen. She left me a letter, too. She knew my name, Ruth. She wrote Emma on an envelope, years before I ever met Thomas." Ruth sat back, her eyes widening. "She knew," she breathed. "Somehow she knew. How is that possible? I don't know. But Adelaide always had a sense about things. She'd get these feelings, these certainties she couldn't explain. She told me once that love creates connections that transcend time and logic, that James visited her in dreams sometimes, showed her things. I thought it was just grief talking, or maybe the beginning of dementia. But maybe," Ruth shook her head, "maybe she really did know somehow." Emma wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, needing its warmth. "There were dozens of letters up there. I only read 2 before Margaret interrupted me. I want to read them all, but I'm almost afraid to. What if—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "What if they make it worse? What if reading about their love just makes me feel how much I've lost? Ruth was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said, Adelaide locked those letters away for 60 years, Emma. She kept them, but couldn't bear to read them after James died. It took her entire lifetime to reach the point where she could open that room again, where she could face what she'd lost without being destroyed by it. She paused, but she did open it again at the end. She went up there the week before she died. Samuel told me he found her sitting in that rocking chair up in the attic, holding something. He said she looked peaceful. She looked ready. Ready for what? To let go. To trust that her story, their story, would continue somehow. Ruth reached across the table and took both of Emma's hands in hers. Those letters aren't just about loss, dear. They're about love that survived death, about memory that became legacy. Adelaide wanted you to have them because she wanted you to know that what you carry forward, your memories of Thomas, this baby you're bringing into the world, it matters. It endures. Emma felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening slightly. Will you come with me, she asked, when I go back up there? I don't want to do it alone. Ruth's smile was gentle. Of course, but not today. Today you need to rest, to settle in. Let yourself just be in this house for a while. Tomorrow we'll go up together, and you can show me what Adelaide left behind. They spent the rest of the morning together, Ruth showing Emma how things worked, which burners on the ancient stove were reliable, where Adelaide kept the good linens, which windows stuck and which opened easily. She pointed out the root cellar in the basement, still stocked with preserves Adelaide had canned years ago, and the attic access in the upstairs hall closet, separate from the main attic stairs. The house has good bones, Ruth said, as they stood in what had once been Adelaide's bedroom. But Samuel's right. It needs work. The foundation issue is serious, and the roof won't last another winter. But there might be solutions we haven't thought of yet. Emma looked around the bedroom, at the hand-stitched curtains and the worn quilt on the bed, and felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd taken on. I don't know how I'm going to manage all this. The repairs alone are more than I can afford, and that's before I even think about getting ready for the baby. One step at a time, Ruth said firmly. First things first. You need to make this place livable for you. Pick a bedroom, make it yours. Then we'll tackle the rest. She paused. There's a women's group at the church in town. We meet every Wednesday. Quilting circle, officially. But really, it's just an excuse for us to gather and talk and help each other out. You should come. There are several women who knew Adelaide, and they'd love to meet you. I don't know how to quilt, Emma said. Ruth laughed. Neither did half the women when they started. That's not really the point. The point is community, connection, making sure no one faces their troubles alone. She squeezed Emma's shoulder. Think about it. After Ruth left, promising to return the next morning, Emma spent the afternoon exploring the house more thoroughly. She opened closets and found Adelaide's clothes still hanging, dresses from the 40s and 50s, conservatively cut, some with moth holes but others pristine. In the parlor, she discovered a piano, its keys yellowed with age, but still in tune. Sheet music sat on the stand, songs from another era, the pages foxed and fragile. She found photograph albums in the built-in bookshelves, opened them carefully, and saw Adelaide's life unfold in black and white images. Adelaide as a young woman, radiant beside James in his uniform. Adelaide pregnant, one hand on her swollen belly, her smile brave, but her eyes haunted. Adelaide with a baby boy, who would grow up to be Thomas's father. Adelaide gradually aging through the decades, her hair going gray, her face settling into lines of quiet sorrow and stubborn strength. In the last album, Emma found recent photographs, color images from the last few years of Adelaide's life. And there, tucked between pages, was a photograph that made Emma's breath catch. It showed Adelaide, elderly and white-haired, standing on this very porch. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young man Emma recognized immediately from other photographs in the house, though she'd never met him in life. Thomas's father. And next to him, tall and handsome, and grinning at the camera, was Thomas himself. He couldn't have been more than 20, but he was unmistakably Thomas. The same crooked smile, the same warm eyes, the same way of standing with his weight on one leg. Emma pulled the photograph free with shaking hands. On the back, in Adelaide's spidery handwriting, was a date. August 2019. Just 6 years ago. Thomas had visited Adelaide 6 years ago and never told Emma. Had stood on this porch, in this house, and never mentioned it. Why hadn't he told her? Emma carried the photograph upstairs to the bedroom she'd slept in, the one that seemed to have been prepared for guests. She set it on the nightstand where she could see it, then lay down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. The baby rolled and kicked, and Emma placed both hands on her belly. "Your daddy was here," she whispered. "He knew this place. He knew Adelaide. Why didn't he tell me?" The house creaked around her, settling in the afternoon cold. Outside, the sun was already beginning its winter descent toward the horizon. Emma closed her eyes, meaning to rest for just a moment, but sleep pulled her under like a tide. She dreamed of letters written in fading ink, of words that glowed like embers in darkness. She dreamed of James in his uniform, standing in the entrance hall, waiting for Adelaide to come down the stairs. She dreamed of Thomas, young and laughing, walking through rooms Emma had never seen him in. And she dreamed of Adelaide, sitting in the rocking chair in the attic, holding a quilt, and humming a lullaby that seemed to echo through decades. When Emma woke, it was dark outside. She lay still, disoriented, listening to the house breathe around her. And then she heard it, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. The sound of music drifting up from downstairs. Piano music. An old song she didn't recognize, played slowly, haltingly, as if the pianist was remembering notes they'd once known by heart. Emma sat up, her pulse quickening. She hadn't touched the piano. Ruth had left hours ago. There was no one else in the house. The music continued, sad and sweet, and impossibly real. Emma stood, moved to the doorway, and looked down the darkened hallway toward the stairs. Light was coming from the parlor, a warm, golden glow that hadn't been there before. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The music stopped. In the sudden silence, Emma heard footsteps on the stairs, soft, measured, climbing toward her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should run, should lock herself in the bedroom, should do anything except stand frozen in the doorway, waiting for whoever, or whatever, was approaching. But she didn't move. The footsteps reached the landing, and a figure stepped into the hallway. Samuel Porter stood there, his cap in his hands, looking apologetic and slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to frighten you." I knocked, but you didn't answer, and I saw your car still here, so I used my key to check on you. I was worried. It's well past dinner time, and Ruth said you didn't have much food. I thought maybe something had happened." Emma sagged against the doorframe, relief and adrenaline making her weak. I fell asleep. I didn't realize how late it was. "I brought some stew," Samuel said, holding up a covered pot she hadn't noticed. Ruth insisted, and He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "I couldn't help myself. I saw the piano, and I used to play, years ago. I thought maybe if I played quietly it wouldn't wake you, but I guess I was wrong. I'm sorry." Emma shook her head, surprised to find herself almost laughing. "It's okay. It's just, I thought—" She stopped, unsure how to explain that she'd thought the house was haunted, that Adelaide's ghost was playing music in the parlor. Samuel's expression softened. "This house can play tricks on you, especially at night. Adelaide used to say it remembered things. Remembered the music that was played here, the conversations that echoed in its rooms. She said sometimes houses hold on to happiness and let it seep back out when someone needs it." He paused. "I think she needed to believe that all the love that had happened in this house wasn't just gone." Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite Thomas's warm sweater. "Do you believe that?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "I believe houses absorb the lives lived in them. I believe walls hold memories, even if we can't see them. Whether that's supernatural or just the way old places feel, I don't know. But I do know Adelaide found comfort here, even in her grief, and I hope you will too." They went downstairs together, and Samuel heated the stew while Emma set the small kitchen table. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Samuel showed her how to work the old furnace, where the fuse box was, and which floorboards to avoid in the upstairs hallway because they were loose. Before he left, he paused at the door. "Ruth told me about the locked room in the attic, Adelaide's room." He looked at Emma with something like reverence. "She never let anyone up there, never talked about what she kept locked away. But she told me once, near the end, that everything in that room was waiting for the right person. I guess that person is you." After he left, Emma climbed the stairs to the attic once more. She stood before the blue door with its wooden sign, the key heavy in her hand, and made herself a promise. Tomorrow she would read the letters. Tomorrow she would learn Adelaide and James's story, would understand what Adelaide wanted her to know. Tonight she would simply sit in this house that remembered love and let herself feel held by its walls, its history, its stubborn refusal to forget what mattered. She touched the door gently, as if it were alive, and whispered, "Thank you, Adelaide. Thank you for remembering me before we ever met." The house settled around her with a soft creak that sounded almost like an answer. Ruth arrived the next morning with pastries from the bakery in town, and a determination Emma was beginning to recognize as characteristic. Together they climbed the attic stairs, Ruth pausing twice to catch her breath, one hand pressed to the small of her back. "Getting old is not for the faint of heart," Ruth said with a wry smile as they reached the top. "But neither is being young and pregnant, I suppose. We're a pair, aren't we?" Emma unlocked the blue door, and they stepped into Adelaide's room together. In the daylight, with another person beside her, the space felt less overwhelming and more sacred. A chapel built to memory, every object placed with reverence and intention. Ruth moved slowly through the room, touching the photographs with gentle fingers, her eyes growing bright with unshed tears. "I never knew," she whispered. "All those years we were friends, and she never showed me this. Never told me she'd kept it all like this." "She was protecting it," Emma said softly. "Protecting them, their story." They settled on the floor beside the writing desk, Emma with her back against the wall and her legs stretched awkwardly around her belly, Ruth cross-legged despite her age. Emma opened the desk and carefully removed the bundles of letters, laying them out between them, like treasures unearthed. "There are so many," Ruth breathed. "Should we read them in order?" Emma asked. Ruth picked up one of the bundles, examining the postmark on the top envelope. "This one is from April 1943. Let's start at the beginning." They read through the morning and into the afternoon, taking turns with the letters, sharing James's words aloud in the quiet room. His voice emerged from the fading ink, young, hopeful, desperately in love. He wrote about training camps and long marches, about terrible food and homesickness, about his fellow soldiers and the letters they received from their own sweethearts. But always, always, he wrote about Adelaide, about her laugh, about the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, about the future they would build together. "I've been saving my pay," he wrote in August 1943. "Every cent I don't absolutely need. By the time I come home, we'll have enough for a down payment on that house you loved, the Victorian with the wrap-around porch. I can see us there, Adelaide. I can see it so clearly. It's like a photograph in my mind. You in the garden, me fixing the shutters. Our children, at least 3, maybe 4, running through those rooms, filling them with noise and life. That's what I'm fighting for. Not some abstract idea of freedom, but the concrete reality of you and me and the life we're going to have." Emma's voice broke on the last sentence, and Ruth squeezed her hand. "He loved her so much," Emma whispered. "And she loved him," Ruth said. "Look at this. She kept every letter, tied them with ribbons, preserved them for 60 years. That kind of love doesn't die, Emma. It transforms, but it doesn't die." They continued reading, watching the progression of dates, September, October, November 1943. The letters became less frequent but more intense. James couldn't say where he was, but Emma could read between the lines. The war was getting closer. The danger was becoming real. In January 1944, James wrote, "Something is coming. I can feel it in the air, in the way the officers look at us, in the intensity of our training. I can't tell you what or when, but I think you know. I need you to know, Adelaide, that whatever happens, I have lived more truly in the months I've known you than in all the years before. You made me real. You made me whole. If I die tomorrow, I die a man who was completely, perfectly loved. Not everyone gets that. Most people live their whole lives and never feel what I feel when I think of you." Emma had to stop, pressing her hand to her mouth. The baby kicked hard, as if responding to her distress, and she placed her other hand on her belly, breathing through the surge of grief. "He knew," she said. "He knew he might not come back." Ruth nodded, her own eyes wet. "They all knew, I think. That whole generation, they went to war, understanding it might be the end. It made them love harder, faster, more intensely than they might have otherwise." The last letters were from spring 1944. James's handwriting became more hurried, the words more precious for their scarcity. In May, he wrote, I don't know when I'll be able to write again. They're moving us out tomorrow. I'm taking your photograph with me, the one where you're smiling at something I said, the one where you look like joy itself. I'm putting it in my pocket, right over my heart. That way, whatever happens, you'll be with me. You'll be the last thing I think of. And then there were no more letters from James. The next bundle was tied with black ribbon. The official notifications, the condolence letters from his commanding officer and fellow soldiers. Ruth read these aloud in a steady voice while Emma wept quietly, her tears falling onto her folded hands. Lieutenant Hartwell died bravely, the commanding officer had written. He led his men with courage and selflessness. In the final moments, he spoke of his fiancée and the life they had planned together. He wanted me to tell you that he loved you, that he was thinking of you, that he was grateful for every moment you shared. But it was the letter from James's best friend, a soldier named Robert, that broke them both completely. Dear Adelaide, you don't know me, but James talked about you constantly. You were his reason for everything, for fighting, for surviving, for believing there was something worth coming home to. I was with him at the end. He didn't suffer long. He was hit during the landing, and I held him while we waited for the medic. But there were so many wounded, so much chaos. In those final minutes, he kept saying your name. He kept saying, "Tell Adelaide I love her. Tell Adelaide I'm sorry." He reached for his pocket, where he kept your photograph, but he couldn't quite reach it. So I got it for him, and I held it where he could see it. His last words were, "She's so beautiful. I was going to make her so happy. I'm sorry, Adelaide. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry he won't get to come home to you. But I want you to know that he died believing in your love, believing in the future you'd planned together. That hope stayed with him until his last breath. In a war where so many things are meaningless, that love meant something. It meant everything." Emma couldn't read anymore. She curled forward over her belly, sobbing, feeling Thomas's loss and Adelaide's loss, and the terrible weight of all the futures that never happened, all the promises death had broken. Ruth gathered her close, rocking her gently, crying too. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet room, while the winter sun moved across the floor. Finally, Ruth pulled back, wiping her eyes. "There's more," she said gently. "Look, there are letters from Adelaide, too, ones she never sent." Emma hadn't noticed before, but there was another bundle, tied with white ribbon, tucked at the back of the desk. She lifted them out carefully. The envelopes had never been addressed, never stamped. They were filled with Adelaide's handwriting, the same spidery script from the letter she'd left Emma. Ruth opened the first one, dated July 1944, 2 months after James died. "My darling James, they tell me you're gone, but I can't believe it. I keep expecting you to walk through the door, to call my name, to pull me into your arms, and tell me it was all a mistake. The house we bought, I moved in last week. I sleep in our bedroom, in the bed we picked out together, but you're not beside me. You'll never be beside me. I have something to tell you, something I learned too late. I'm pregnant, James. We're going to have a baby. The doctor says it will come in January. I should be happy, but all I feel is terror. How do I raise our child alone? How do I explain that their father was a hero who died for something noble, when all I can think is that I would have traded every noble cause in the world for one more day with you? I'm so angry at you for leaving. I'm so angry at the war, at the world, at God. But mostly, I'm just empty. You took something with you when you died, and I don't know how to get it back. I love you. I hate you for dying. I love you. Adelaide. The letters continued through the years, a one-sided conversation with a ghost. Adelaide wrote about being pregnant, about feeling the baby move, and wishing James could feel it too. She wrote about giving birth alone, about naming the baby James after his father, about the terror and joy of motherhood without a partner. She wrote about her son's first steps, his first words, his first day of school. She wrote about teaching him to tie his shoes, to ride a bicycle, to be gentle and kind and brave. She wrote about loneliness that never eased, about grief that became a constant companion rather than a visitor. But she also wrote about moments of grace, her son's laugh that sounded like James's, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, small mercies that felt like James reaching through death to touch her. The letters spanned decades. Adelaide wrote less frequently as years passed, but she never stopped completely. She wrote when her son graduated high school, when he got married, when he had a son of his own. She wrote when her son died of a heart attack at 40, when grief circled back and took her again. "I've lost both of you now," she wrote after her son's funeral. "Our boy is gone, James, and I'm alone again. Sometimes I think grief is just love with nowhere to go. All the love I still have for you, for our son, it sits inside me with no outlet, no release. I'm 80 years old, and I'm still loving you both, still missing you both, still wishing things had been different." The final letter was dated just 3 weeks before Adelaide died. "My darling James, I'm so tired. My body is failing, and I'm grateful for it. I've lived 40 years longer than you did, and while I don't regret the life I built, I'm ready to stop now, ready to stop missing you, ready to stop carrying this weight. But before I go, I need to tell you something. Our grandson Thomas married a girl named Emma. I've never met her, but Diane tells me she's kind, that Thomas loves her deeply, that they're expecting a baby. And I realized something. Our love didn't end when you died, James. It continued through our son, through our grandson, and now through this great-grandchild who will carry our blood, our story, our legacy forward. I'm leaving them the house. Our house, the one we bought together, the one I filled with memories of you. I'm leaving them everything in this room, our letters, our photographs, our story, because I want them to know that love survives, that even when death takes the beloved, love persists. It changes form, it becomes memory and legacy and the stories we tell, but it doesn't disappear. I'm not afraid anymore, James. I'm ready to come find you, wherever you are. Wait for me. I've been waiting for 60 years. Now it's your turn. Forever yours." Adelaide Emma read the last words through a blur of tears, her hands shaking. Ruth sat beside her, crying silently, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The afternoon light had shifted, filling the room with a golden glow that made the dust motes look like tiny stars suspended in amber. "She knew," Emma finally whispered. "She knew about me before I even met Thomas. She knew about the baby." "She had faith," Ruth said. "Faith that love would continue, that the story would go on." Emma looked around the room, at the photographs of James and Adelaide young and full of hope, at the cradle in the corner, at the cedar chest with its quilts and baby clothes. She prepared all of this For me. For my baby. For her great-grandchild, Ruth corrected gently. For the continuation of what she and James started. Emma felt something shift inside her, a recognition so profound it felt physical. This room, this house, this legacy, it wasn't just Adelaide's gift to her. It was Adelaide's way of ensuring that the love she and James shared wouldn't die with her, that it would live on through Emma, through the baby growing inside her, through all the generations that would come after. I don't know if I can carry that, Emma said. That weight, that responsibility. Ruth took her hand. You're already carrying it. You've been carrying it since the moment you decided to keep this house, since the moment you chose Thomas's child over an easier life. Adelaide knew you would. That's why she left it all to you. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of amber and rose. Emma placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm, and thought of the chain of love that connected her to this moment. James to Adelaide, Adelaide to their son to Thomas, Thomas to her, and now her to this child, who would be born into a house that remembered love. We should go downstairs, Ruth finally said. Get you something to eat. You've had enough emotion for one day. But Emma shook her head. Wait, there's one more thing. She crossed to the cedar chest and lifted out the quilt she'd seen on her first visit. The masterpiece with its embroidered squares, its images of house and trees and birds and the baby cradled at the center. She unfolded it carefully, spreading it across her lap. In the fading light, she could see details she'd missed before, tiny stitches in the border that spelled out names. James, Adelaide, their son's name, and there, at the very bottom edge, in threads so fine she had to squint to read it, Thomas, Emma, baby. She knew our names, Emma breathed. She embroidered our names into the quilt before we even met. Ruth leaned close, her finger tracing the delicate stitches. My God, how is that possible? Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, but she did. She knew. She clutched the quilt to her chest, feeling the weight of 60 years of love and loss and hope woven into every thread. This is what she wanted me to have. This is what she made for us. They descended the attic stairs slowly, Emma carrying the quilt, Ruth steadying her with a hand on her elbow. In the kitchen, Ruth made tea while Emma spread the quilt across the table, examining every square, every image, every word stitched into the fabric. Adelaide spent years making this, Ruth said, setting a steaming cup beside Emma. She told me once she was working on something important, something she couldn't show me yet. This must have been it. Emma traced the embroidered baby at the quilt's center, thinking of her own child, who would be born in just 4 months, would sleep beneath this quilt, would be wrapped in the same love that had sustained Adelaide through 60 years of grief. The phone rang, shattering the quiet moment. Emma answered it, still half lost in the spell of the quilt and the letters and the overwhelming weight of inheritance. Mrs. Hartwell, this is David Brennan. I understand you've settled into Adelaide's house. Emma's hand tightened on the phone. Yes, and I told your representative I'm not selling. I understand your emotional attachment, Brennan said smoothly, but I don't think you fully grasp your situation. That house needs extensive repairs you can't afford. The property taxes will be due again in 6 months, and you have a baby coming. Be practical, Mrs. Hartwell. Take my offer. It's more than generous. I said no. The offer expires in 3 days. After that, I'll be pursuing other properties in the area. This is your last chance to make a smart decision. Emma felt anger flare hot in her chest. The smartest decision I've made was choosing to keep this house, and nothing you say will change my mind. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Ruth watched her with something like pride. Good for you, Ruth said firmly. That man has been trying to buy up every piece of property in Millbrook for his development plans. Adelaide fought him for years. But he's right, Emma said, sinking into a chair. I can't afford the repairs. I don't have income. I don't know how I'm going to manage the taxes, let alone fix the foundation and the roof and everything else Samuel mentioned. We'll figure it out, Ruth said, one step at a time. First, she was interrupted by a knock at the door. Emma opened it to find Samuel standing on the porch, his face grave. There's a problem, he said without preamble. I was down in the basement checking the furnace, and I found water. A lot of water. The foundation crack is worse than I thought. It's not just letting in moisture, it's actively leaking. And with the ground still frozen and more snow predicted, it's only going to get worse. Emma felt the room tilt. How bad? Bad enough that we need to address it immediately, before the water damages the support beams. I'm talking days, not weeks. Samuel looked pained. I've called everyone I know, and the cheapest estimate I can get is $15,000. And that's just for the foundation. It doesn't include the roof or the furnace. $15,000. Emma did the math in her head. Her savings wouldn't even cover a third of it. She'd have to drain every account, max out the one credit card she had left, and still come up short. I don't have it, she said quietly. I don't have that kind of money. Samuel and Ruth exchanged a look. Then we need to talk about your options, Samuel said gently. Because if we don't fix this soon, the damage will become catastrophic. And then you won't have a choice about selling. Emma looked past them into the house, at the entrance hall with its faded wallpaper and carved banister, at the rooms filled with Adelaide's furniture and memories. She thought of the attic room with its photographs and letters, of the quilt spread on the kitchen table, of Adelaide's faith that love would continue, that the story would go on. And she thought of Thomas, of the promises they'd made to each other, of the future they'd planned that cancer had stolen. She thought of the baby growing inside her, Thomas's child, Adelaide's great-grandchild, the next link in a chain of love that stretched back through decades. No, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not giving up. There has to be another way. Emma, Ruth began. There has to be, Emma repeated, placing her hand on her belly. Adelaide didn't preserve all of this, didn't leave me this house and this story, just for me to lose it the moment things got hard. She survived losing James. She survived raising a child alone. She survived 60 years of grief and kept loving, kept hoping, kept believing the story would continue. Emma looked at Ruth, at Samuel, her eyes bright with tears and determination. I'm not going to be the one who lets her down. I'm not going to be the one who ends it. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Emma glanced toward the window. The sky had darkened while they talked, heavy clouds rolling in from the north. The first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the glass like urgent fingers. Storm's coming, Samuel said quietly. Going to be a bad one. Emma watched the rain begin to fall harder, the wind picking up, the world outside dissolving into gray. And she thought, absurdly, that, of course, there was a storm. Of course, the moment she decided to fight was the moment everything became harder. That's how life worked. That's how grief worked. That's how faith was tested. "Let it come," she whispered. "I'm not leaving." The storm hit at midnight, with a fury that shook the old house to its bones. Emma lay awake in Adelaide's bed, listening to rain hammer the roof and wind scream around the corners. Somewhere downstairs, something rattled. A loose shutter, maybe, or a window that hadn't been properly latched. The house groaned and creaked, like a ship in heavy seas, and Emma felt every sound in her chest, in her bones, in the baby who twisted restlessly inside her. She'd sent Ruth and Samuel home before the worst of it arrived, insisting she'd be fine, that she wasn't afraid of storms. But now, alone in the darkness, with only the sound of nature's violence for company, she wondered if she'd been foolish. The house felt vast and empty around her, full of shadows that moved when lightning flashed. At 2 a.m, she heard it, a crash so loud it brought her upright in bed, her heart hammering. Then another sound, steady and insistent. Water, running water, somewhere below. Emma grabbed her phone, using its light to navigate the hallway. The sound grew louder as she descended the stairs, and when she reached the first floor, she understood. Water was pouring through the ceiling in the back hallway, streaming down the walls, pooling on the hardwood floor. The leak Samuel had warned about, it had finally broken through completely. She stood frozen, watching the water cascade down, feeling utterly helpless. She had no idea how to stop it, no idea what to do. All she knew was that the house, Adelaide's house, Thomas's legacy, her baby's inheritance, was being destroyed while she watched. The phone in her hand rang, making her jump. Ruth's number flashed on the screen. "Emma, are you all right? Samuel just drove past. He saw your lights on." "There's water," Emma said, her voice breaking, "coming through the ceiling. I don't know how to stop it. We're coming. Don't try to fix it yourself. Just move what you can away from the water and wait for us." They arrived 20 minutes later, both of them drenched, Samuel carrying tools and tarps. He took one look at the cascading water and shook his head grimly. The roof finally gave out. The water's getting in through the attic, running down through the walls. He looked at Emma, his expression pained. "I need to be honest with you. This is bad. Between the foundation and the roof, you're looking at structural damage that goes beyond simple repairs. The house needs major work, Emma. The kind that costs more than it's worth." "Don't say that," Emma whispered. "I have to say it, because you have to make a choice." Samuel set down his tools. "David Brennan's offer is still on the table for another 2 days. That money could give you and your baby a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere that isn't falling apart around you." Emma looked at the water pooling on the floor, at the dark stains spreading across the ceiling. She thought of the $15,000 she didn't have, of the foundation cracking beneath her feet, of the baby who would be born in 4 months into a house that might collapse around them. And she thought of Adelaide's letter. "You are not alone, dear girl." But standing here in the wreckage of a storm, watching Adelaide's house literally crumbling, Emma had never felt more alone in her life. "I need air," she said suddenly. "I need to think." Before Ruth or Samuel could stop her, Emma grabbed a coat and walked out onto the porch. The rain was lighter now, the worst of the storm passing, but the wind still whipped around her, cold and sharp. She stood at the railing, one hand on her belly, and looked out at the darkness. "I don't know what to do," she said to the night, to Thomas, to Adelaide, to anyone who might be listening. "Tell me what to do." The wind answered with a gust that sent leaves skittering across the porch. And then, in the space between one breath and the next, Emma heard it. Music, faint and distant, but unmistakable. Piano music drifting up from inside the house. She turned slowly and looked through the window into the parlor. The room was dark, but she could see the shape of the piano, and she could swear, though it was impossible, that she could see someone sitting there. A figure in the darkness, hands moving over the keys, playing a melody that sounded like a lullaby, like a promise, like hope refusing to die. Emma's breath caught. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Just shadows, just wishful thinking, just grief playing tricks on her exhausted mind. But the music continued for a moment longer before fading into silence. Emma walked back inside slowly. Ruth and Samuel had spread tarps over the wet floor and were discussing what needed to be done at first light. They stopped talking when they saw her face. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked. "The piano?" They exchanged glances. "Emma," Ruth said gently, "there's no one here but us." I know that, but I heard it." Emma moved to the parlor doorway, looking at the old piano with its yellowed keys. "And I think it was Adelaide, telling me not to give up." Samuel opened his mouth, probably to say something practical and kind about stress and grief and houses settling. But Ruth put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "What did you hear?" Ruth asked. "A lullaby, like something you'd sing to a baby." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Like Adelaide used to sing to her son, maybe. Like she wanted me to know that this house, it's meant for babies, for children, for life continuing, not for giving up." She walked to the kitchen table, where the quilt still lay spread out, untouched by the water damage in the other rooms. She ran her fingers over the embroidered baby at its center, over the names stitched in delicate thread. Thomas, Emma, baby. "Adelaide believed love persists," Emma said quietly. "Even when everything falls apart. Even when death takes everything. She believed love finds a way to continue." She looked up at Ruth and Samuel, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "I'm not selling. I don't care how impossible it seems. I'm not the one who ends this story." "Emma," Samuel started. "No, listen to me. Adelaide kept loving James for 60 years after he died. She raised their son alone. She survived loss that should have destroyed her, and she did it because she believed their love mattered, that it was worth preserving." Emma's voice grew stronger. "Thomas and I had 3 years together. 3 years before cancer took him. But we loved each other completely in that time, and this baby is proof that our love continues. I won't dishonor that by walking away the moment things get hard." "But the repairs," Ruth began. "We'll figure it out. I'll get a job. I'll take out loans. I'll do whatever I have to do." Emma pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. This child deserves to grow up in this house, surrounded by the story of where they came from. Deserves to know that their great-great-grandmother loved so deeply she spent 60 years honoring that love. Deserves to understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about legacy, about choosing to carry forward what matters. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of water dripping. Finally, Samuel nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then we find another way. Tomorrow I'll make some calls. There are grants sometimes for historical properties, and the church might be able to help. We'll figure something out." Ruth crossed to Emma and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Adelaide would be proud of you." Emma closed her eyes, letting herself be held, feeling the exhaustion of the long night finally catching up with her. When Ruth released her, Emma looked around at the damaged house, at the water stains and the tarps and the evidence of how much work lay ahead. "Tomorrow," she said firmly. "Tomorrow we start fixing it. Tonight, I just need to sleep." She climbed the stairs slowly, her body aching, and collapsed into bed, still wearing her damp clothes. Through the window, she could see the storm clouds breaking apart, stars appearing in the gaps between them. The rain had stopped. The wind had calmed. The worst had passed. Emma placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "We're staying, little one. This is our home now, our inheritance, our story to continue." The baby rolled against her palm, as if in agreement. And somewhere in the house, so faint Emma might have imagined it, she heard the echo of piano music, a lullaby drifting through the darkness like a blessing, like a promise that love, despite everything, endures. Spring came to Millbrook the way it always did, slowly at first, tentative, as if winter might change its mind and return. But by April, the snow had melted completely, leaving the earth soft and dark and ready for new things to grow. Emma stood on the porch of Adelaide's house, her house now, and watched the morning sun paint the world in shades of gold and green. Her hand rested on her belly, swollen and heavy with the weight of a child who would arrive any day now. 8.5 months had passed since she'd first walked through Adelaide's door. 8 months of struggle and grace in equal measure. The house had been saved. Not easily, not without help, but saved, nonetheless. Ruth's quilting circle had rallied first, raising $3,000 through a bake sale, an auction that brought the whole town together. Samuel had found a grant for historical preservation that covered another $8,000. The rest had come from smaller miracles. A discounted rate from contractors who'd known Adelaide, donated materials from the hardware store, volunteer labor from church members who showed up on Saturdays with tools and determination. By February, the foundation had been repaired. By March, a new roof gleamed above her head. The furnace had been replaced, the water damage fixed, the broken windows restored. The house stood solid now, renewed, ready for the life Emma would bring into it. She'd found work too, part-time at the library in town, shelving books and helping with story hour for children. The pay wasn't much, but combined with Thomas's life insurance and her careful budgeting, it was enough. More than enough. Because what she'd discovered in Millbrook wasn't just financial survival. It was community, connection, the understanding that no one had to face hardship alone. The women from the quilting circle visited every Wednesday. Ruth came by almost daily, bringing food and friendship and stories about Adelaide that made Emma feel she'd known her great-grandmother-in-law after all. Samuel maintained the property, refusing payment, saying Adelaide had been kind to him when his own wife was sick, and this was how he honored that kindness. Emma had read all of Adelaide's letters now, every word James had written, Every response Adelaide had penned but never sent. She'd memorized their story, let it become part of her own story, understood that grief and love were two sides of the same coin. You couldn't have one without risking the other. And she'd made her peace with Thomas's death. Not acceptance, exactly. The grief still came in waves, still caught her breathless on ordinary Tuesday afternoons. But she'd learned what Adelaide had learned, that love persists even when the beloved is gone. That memory becomes legacy, that the dead live on through the choices of those who remember them. A car pulled into the driveway, and Ruth emerged carrying a covered dish and wearing a smile that lit her entire face. "I brought breakfast casserole," Ruth called, climbing the porch steps with surprising agility for a woman her age. "And I have news. The Historical Society approved the landmark status for the house. It's official now. Adelaide's house is protected. No one can tear it down or significantly alter it without approval." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. Happy tears this time. Grateful tears. "That means Brennan can't touch it," Ruth confirmed. "Even if you wanted to sell, which you don't, it would have to go to someone who'd preserve it. Adelaide's legacy is safe." They went inside together, and Emma marveled, as she did every day, at how the house had transformed. The rooms she'd cleaned and painted, the furniture she'd uncovered and polished, the photographs she'd framed and hung. James and Adelaide, young and full of hope, watching over the rooms where Emma now lived. In the nursery upstairs, she'd created a space that honored both past and future. The cradle from Adelaide's locked room stood beside a new crib. The embroidered quilt lay carefully preserved in a shadow box on the wall, and a replica Ruth had helped her make covered the crib mattress. The walls were painted soft yellow, and morning light streamed through windows that looked out over the woods behind the house. "Have you decided on a name?" Ruth asked as they ate breakfast at the kitchen table. Emma nodded, her hand moving to her belly. "If it's a girl, Adelaide Rose, after Thomas's grandmother. If it's a boy, James Thomas, after both of them." Ruth's eyes glistened. "Perfect! Adelaide would have loved that." They spent the morning together, Ruth helping Emma fold the last of the baby clothes, organize the nursery, prepare for the arrival that felt imminent now. Emma's back had been aching since dawn, a persistent pressure that she kept dismissing as false labor. She'd had several episodes over the past weeks. Braxton Hicks contractions, the doctor called them. Practice runs. But by noon, the pain had intensified into something that couldn't be ignored. "Ruth," Emma said quietly, gripping the edge of the changing table, "I think it's time." They drove to the hospital in Ruth's car, Emma breathing through contractions that came faster and stronger with each passing mile. Ruth held her hand, murmured encouragement, called Samuel to let him know what was happening. The labor was long, 16 hours of pain and pushing, and moments where Emma thought she couldn't continue. But through it all, she thought of Adelaide. Adelaide, who'd given birth alone, without James, without the man she loved beside her, to hold her hand and tell her she was strong. Adelaide, who'd done this knowing her child would never know his father, that she'd be raising him in a world marked by loss. And Emma drew strength from that, from knowing she was part of a chain of women who'd endured, who'd survived, who'd brought life into the world despite grief and fear and impossible circumstances. At 3:47 a.m. on April 15th, Emma's daughter was born. Adelaide Rose Hartwell came into the world screaming, red-faced and perfect, weighing 7 pounds and 6 ounces. The nurse placed her on Emma's chest, and Emma felt something inside her heel that she hadn't even known was broken. "Hello, Adelaide," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little love. I've been waiting for you." The baby quieted at her mother's voice, her tiny hand curling around Emma's finger with surprising strength. And Emma looked down at her daughter, at Thomas's daughter, at Adelaide's great-great-granddaughter, and understood finally what Adelaide had tried to tell her through the letters and the quilt and the locked room filled with memories. Love doesn't end. It transforms, continues, becomes the people who carry it forward. 3 days later, Emma brought Adelaide Rose home to the house that had been waiting for her. Ruth and Samuel were there, along with half the quilting circle, and someone had hung a banner over the porch. "Welcome home, baby Adelaide." Emma carried her daughter through the front door, through the entrance hall, where James had once walked, where Adelaide had lived for decades, where Thomas had visited 6 years ago, and never told Emma because perhaps he'd known, somehow, that she'd end up here eventually. She climbed the stairs to the nursery and settled into the rocking chair, the same chair that had sat in Adelaide's locked room for 60 years. She held her daughter close and began to rock, the motion ancient and soothing, the rhythm older than memory. Through the window, she could see the woods beginning to green, life returning after winter's long hold. In the cradle beside her, the replica quilt waited, its embroidered squares telling the story of James and Adelaide, of love that persisted through death, of legacy passed down through generations. Emma looked down at her daughter's sleeping face and saw Thomas in the shape of her nose, in the curve of her tiny ears. And she saw Adelaide, too, somehow, in the stubborn set of the baby's chin, in the way her hand gripped Emma's finger, as if she'd never let go. "You are so loved," Emma whispered, "by me, by your father who watches over you, by your great-great-grandmother who prepared this house for you, by all the people who came before and all the people who will come after." She paused, her voice breaking. "You are the answer to every prayer Adelaide ever prayed, the proof that love continues, the hope that endures." Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the nursery in warm light. The house settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, and Emma could have sworn she heard, faint as breath, the distant sound of piano music, a lullaby played by invisible hands, a blessing from someone who'd waited 60 years to know her love had mattered. Emma closed her eyes and rocked her daughter, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something that might have been peace, might have been joy, might have been the understanding that grief and love could coexist, that loss and hope weren't opposites, but companions on the same journey. The house that remembered Adelaide now remembered Emma too. And one day, it would remember Adelaide Rose and the children she might have, and all the generations that would fill these rooms with laughter and tears and the messy, beautiful business of living. Love persists, Emma thought, echoing the words embroidered on the quilt. Love continues. And in her arms, her daughter stirred and sighed, already dreaming the dreams that would carry Adelaide's legacy into a future none of them could see, but all of them had helped create. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional, cinematic stories about motherhood, legacy, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us across generations. Every week, we bring you heartfelt tales of women finding strength in impossible circumstances, discovering hidden inheritances, and uncovering family secrets that change everything. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that will make you cry, hope, and believe in the power of love that endures. Share this story with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their grief, their struggles, or their journey toward healing. Your next emotional journey is just one click away.